State of State, we got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannifan. This is State of State. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. From the NFL preseason to college football kicking off soon, BetOnline is every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Think you know your stuff? Get in on the winner-takes-all $300,000 NFL Survivor Pool for the upcoming season. Now, when the games are over, head to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with over 150 slots games. Head to betonline.ag today and use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to get in on the action. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. State of State is proud to partner with Illumination Brewing for another season of crafting State IPA, the perfect tailgate and game day beer for Penn State football fans. State IPA is available starting this coming Monday, August 19th at your local beer distributor, grocery store, plus select bars and restaurants. Visit illuminationbrewing.com/beer/state-IPA to learn more. Must be 21 years or older to purchase. Please drink responsibly. State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Hi, everyone. Welcome to State of State. Penn State's training camp continues here in the proverbial dog days of August. A few weeks ago, we split up our dissection of what's happening in training camp between the offense and the defense. We're going to do the same thing again this week as we get closer and closer to August 31st. Penn State plays a freaking football game on the road at West Virginia. I can't wait for that to happen. So this episode is all about the defense and the latest news and notes out of training camp for Penn State football. Like, comment, subscribe, rate us, turn on notifications as always. Get in the comments section on YouTube and on social media at State of State Pod. A little housekeeping altogether, as you probably heard at the beginning of the show. The State IPA is going to be back as of this Monday, August 19th. So get that wherever you can get your beer. Obviously throughout the state of Pennsylvania, the Northeast as well. But the website for that is in the description of this podcast. So we're very much looking forward to doing that again with Funk Brewing / Illumination Brewing. That's very, very exciting. And then also for those of you watching on YouTube, for those of you listening on other platforms, you can head to our YouTube channel because now you have the opportunity to be a member of State of State's YouTube channel. Membership is labeled We Are State of State. It's 99 cents a month. What do you get in return for that? You get ad-free shows. That's something that's been put in the comments section I don't know how many times for years on this podcast, and we're finally able to do it. YouTube has given us the opportunity to offer these memberships. So for just 99 cents a month, you can get every upcoming episode of State of State ad free. So you can check that out now on our YouTube channel. If you're watching there already, take a look. If you're listening, also take a look on YouTube. We appreciate you guys so much. We're gearing up for the season. We're so excited about it. Justin, one thing I figured you'd be extremely excited about was a recent comment by James Franklin talking about Lockdown U, the defensive backs. He has said, quote, "This unit has not rebuilt. They have reloaded." And that seems completely accurate. Now, safeties specifically, you lost King Mack transferring to Alabama, but we kind of knew who the players were going to be there, Reed, Wheatley, and Winston. Then it's cornerback, where there were a lot of questions. 3 guys leaving the program, 2 into the NFL, 1 Johnny Dixon. We wish him the best from a medical standpoint, but Daquan Hardy and Kalen King are in the National Football League. So it would be reasonable to be like, man, they lost 3 guys. And the reality is there are now 6, 7 defensive backs that Penn State credibly could trot out there on Saturdays and have success. How do you feel hearing that?
I think it's a great situation when you have that type of depth on the back end, whether it's from a defensive coordinator standpoint, from a safeties coach, a corners coach standpoint, I mean, injuries happen, right? So we just want to make sure that you have guys that can cover dangerous receivers. We talk about the Big Ten being one of the most elite conference, well, probably the most elite conference in terms of talent, top to bottom across the country, and have defensive backs that can cover and match up from just a athletic standpoint. Really gives you a chance to win and make some noise, and gives again the defensive coordinator some flexibility and creativity to get after the quarterbacks.
Have you heard anything specifically in terms of who the anticipated starters could be at corner? Because it does seem like maybe it'll be a case by case basis. There are some leaders in the proverbial clubhouse, but curious what you've heard.
No, I haven't heard of any starters, but again, I've mentioned this before that they have a philosophy where a lot of guys get reps. I remember when oops, when Amani and John Reed and those guys were playing, when they were going into the NFL draft, some of the scouts were like, "Hey, these like you have 4 corners that play equal amount of snaps." So again, when we think about having enough players where you can play 4 corners to get an equal amount of snaps, I think is pretty powerful. So I'm saying that to say that I think regardless of who the starter is going to be, all the players are going to play that can play.
I'm excited about that. I think that variety, especially to throw that opposite a potentially inexperienced quarterback, for instance, has got to be a headache. Even experienced quarterbacks, where you're just trying to identify based on uniform number, and that's a constant revolving door. And if you can mix up those coverages at the same time, that has got to be an enormous headache for an offensive coordinator and a quarterback as you're trying to identify what the defense is that you're going up against. One other comment that James Franklin had specifically about Lockdown U was in regard to KJ Winston, who I'd say outside of Abdul Carter is the most talked about player on this defense going into 2024, had a spectacular 2023 campaign for someone who is so inexperienced at the college level. James Franklin recently said about KJ Winston, quote, "He's just a man, so mature, knows how to practice, prepare, totally locked in. Football is really important to him. I don't have enough adjectives for him. You look at him physically, he's beautiful. Great relationship with the coaches, an extension of the coaching staff. I think he's going to have a big year for us and has a very special and bright future." I mean, I don't know if I've heard a better endorsement ever come out of James Franklin's mouth.
If James calls a player beautiful, just know he probably looks like a Greek god. I mean, when he throws that out, he's pretty on point about like that guy's beautiful. He said last time he said that about safety, I think it was Jaquan Brisker. But when he says that, I mean, he means it. But like that's funny because that's the first thing when I said when I went to our spring practice, was like, man, is that KJ? I was like, he's a big dude. I mean, just like the way he carries himself, right? He has a very serious demeanor. And it's always interesting when you have guys that are like physically imposing and then they kind of walk with this aura of being a bully. I think that's where you hear him saying like he's a man, where it's like it's serious. He's coming to work, it's business. He takes things, like I said, to the 10th power when you talk about being serious or how you approach the game. But I think that's a great, proclamation from a head coach about
glowing
start and safety. I think he should feel good about it going into it. Now it's just a matter of rising to the occasion when the season starts. But I'm a fan. I'm a fan of KJ. I mean, since he came out of high school, like, yeah, DMV, stand up.
You mentioned Jaquan Brisker. People are comparing what Jalen Reed's role is about to be to kind of what Jaquan Brisker was doing once upon a time at Penn State, kind of that hybrid safety / corner / linebacker. So that's, I think, very interesting. The man that I don't think is getting enough attention is Zakee Wheatley. I feel like, it's like, all right, KJ is getting a lot of praise. Jalen Reed's going to be in a specialized position. What makes Zakee Wheatley special from what you've seen?
Understands interception points and making plays. That's the one thing that I think he's done from day one, is figure out how to get to the ball before the ball gets to the receiver. And I think when you're talking on the back end, that's extremely important. When you have players like that make a lot of plays, typically, we think about, I have a saying when you talk about development and evaluation, does a guy have a effort level, right? Like right before a play happens, like bump it, I'm gonna go make this play. A lot of times this straddles the line of trust with a coach because you never know exactly. I mean, it's a risk reward type of situation.
Calculated risk, right?
Calculated risk. No, I'm just saying one, we haven't seen him be that cemented starter, but also have a track record of making plays. My brain, from just the information given, is thinking like, okay, can they trust him fully all the time, or is it just more of a seesaw type of ride? So probably want to see more consistency from him in those big level plays, whether it's showing up in the run game, doing those splash plays just across the board. I don't know if that's true, but for someone that's made as many plays as he has and not being the cemented starter, that's what makes me wonder what gap he needs to fill in, because he's been one of my favorites from jump. You know, I like possession creators, and he's been one of those.
Tom Allen has been very outspoken. He was interviewing for the job, and then when he got on campus and he saw the likes of Wheatley, Reed, and Winston, it was like, I have to have all three of these guys on the field at the same time. So it's finding a way. It wasn't too much of a stretch based on what Penn State has run in the past, and I'm going to get to that in a moment, some comments in regards to how the carryover between Manny Diaz and Tom Allen has been pretty good all together. So I think that's a real positive for this unit. I do want to switch our attention to linebacker, however, because that's been a camp battle that we've certainly talked about over the last few weeks and months leading into training camp. So I think the anticipated starters at the two primary linebacker spots, and this shouldn't shock anybody, Kobe King and Tony Rojas. You and I have spoken glowingly of both of those guys. Then in terms of the proverbial two deep behind those guys, it would probably be Tyler Elsdon, friend of the show, right behind Kobe King, and then potentially Dom DeLuca right behind Tony Rojas as a potential weak side linebacker, something like that. And your subs would be Tamir Robinson and Kari Jackson, who've done quite well, it sounds like, in camp. Tamir Robinson is somebody that I know you're very high on. With Kavion Keys out and Keon Wiley with an injury, you've got DeLuca and Elsdon supplementing this, plus some younger guys potentially having the opportunity to get some reps. How do you feel about that nucleus altogether at linebacker?
I mean, linebacker, right? When you think of it, just like pure talent and guys that have to step up, even the guys that might have question marks that haven't played that many downs last year, you understand that they have the talent that can play. And splashed a little bit last year. And again, another year of development. I'm really big on that. And like I said, I'm high on Tamir, just seeing him coming out of high school and the core traits that he possesses amongst the defense, and how I know those guys get the players ready to compete and go. Feel good about the linebacker position, as I always have, to be honest.
There's been a lot of positivity about the development there, and Tamir Robinson's a guy that I think maybe not this year, but next year you're going to see his opportunity come, and I think that's going to be a really exciting prospect altogether. The fact that you've got guys who've been in the program for a long time, and Elsdon and DeLuca, who can come in there and supplement, maybe not necessarily hold on to be the number one linebacker in there on a regular basis, getting the lion's share of the snaps, but that's a really nice rotation there altogether, and it just gives you some depth you need at that position with the aforementioned Wiley and Keys, not necessarily in the mix, Wiley being injured, Keys off the team. I was mentioning in terms of the carryover between Tom Allen and Manny Diaz, James Franklin was speaking about that, and he said, quote, "It's been really similar. We're both do a 4-down front, an attack front from Brent Pride, Manny Diaz." Franklin said we were more of a quarter, half team than more of a man defense team with Diaz, and I think we're going to continue that with that man defense. Just had so much success with that. I'd like to take away all the, quote, gimme yards on the field. It's nice to know as an offensive coordinator that the defense is giving you field access. It's just been a few tweaks and coverage variations, and I think we will complement what we do, some blitz variations, not a whole lot different. The continuation of utilizing that man defense and the way that James Franklin phrased that, do you like the direction that they're headed in? Because it does feel like just a natural continuation.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, especially when you bring in like someone like Tom Allen on the backside. I mean, you just got to lean into what he does. And again, when you've had success, you have the formula that worked, right? Like you have a lot of games, a lot of plays where you can self-evaluate and see like, what can we switch up? Where can we make things better? And when you're starting at a standard that's so high, bringing in a former head coach that's had nice success on the defensive side, I mean, you should predict success, especially with the talent that we just mentioned.
Understanding the differences between those different coverages that James Franklin was talking about, the quarter, half, and then to a man defense, how big of an adjustment Was that potentially for you at any level of football? I mean, those are a variety of different things that you have to put into your brain and then execute on the field.
I mean, once you understand like the basic fundamentals of covering a receiver when you're talking about quarter, half, that then transitions into man. I mean, figure quarters is essentially man, unless your receiver goes away from you right now. But if he's up the field, most routes, it's essentially man. So it's a little quarter, half to man is a little mental gymnastics. It's just when you're only playing cover three and you transition to like those split coverages, that transition that makes it a little bit different because whether from being passive from a cover three standpoint to being more aggressive and jumping on routes, I think when you're playing quarters, you have some leeway or a green light, a certain routes that you're supposed to jump. And when you play man, it's just a slight switch to be like, all right, now everywhere this guy goes, I got him. So there's a little bit of mental gymnastics, but it also, I think, prepares guys to go to the next level and play in the NFL. Because when you get to the NFL, whether they're doing zone blitzes, cover three type of looks, zone is essentially man in the NFL. And so like there's no covering grass at that level. So when you understand route combinations and when to change from playing like match concepts and things of that nature, I think it prepares you well for the next level and gives your offensive and defensive coordinator specifically, a lot of creativity to throw out there against the offense.
One comment from, I know this episode's all about the defense, but I think it does have some bearing on Penn State's defenses. This came from offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki. He was talking about the wide receivers, and he said, quote, the wide receivers need to dictate their route running to the defense and not allow DBs to dictate to them. So I don't want everybody to freak out. We will talk about the offense in another episode this week. So we will get into that in terms of how the wide receivers are doing. But when you hear that at this point in camp, this point in the year, the season's right around the corner, is like, okay, DBs are kind of having their way right now. What do you think?
Well, it sounds good, right? Because like, I mean, I do DB tech and do some DB defensive back development programs here. And that's the main thing that I'm trying to articulate to the defensive backs. It's like, we're not playing a reactionary game. Like we're on offense. We're taking the game to them. We're dictating where our leverage is. We're dictating where we want them to go. And then we react to what we're anticipating. So when you have that type of aggression from a defensive back standpoint versus the offensive coach, hey, we're taking it to the receivers, that's just more of an aggression and a philosophical approach on how you're going to, I guess, attack an offense, right? Whether I think that's a completely different verbiage than saying, hey, we're going to take what the defense gives us, right? I think that's completely different. Take what the defense gives us. Like, all right, I'm playing whatever we see. It's that versus like, I don't care if it's man, this, that, I'm coming at you, like right here between the eyes. That's a completely different mentality, regardless if the outcomes are the same. It just puts you on that gas pedal a little bit. And I like to hear that because I know from the defensive standpoint, I'm always preaching the defensive backs, hey, we're taking it to the offense.
It has felt like the last few years, and I know we're talking about the defense, but deviating a little bit here. It does feel like the last few years, not putting this all on Mike Yurcich, there have been a handful of offensive coordinators at Penn State who've been guilty of this, in my opinion, where it has been take what the defense gives us. And it feels like we're about to see a change.
That's a common philosophical approach from offensive coordinators. I mean, I've have parents, clients, or that used to be quarterbacks, and I'm like, hey, how was this coach? I'm like, hey, make the right throw, do this, because it's all about. At the end of the day, it's also you can't turn the ball over, right? We talk about predictors of success on the defense. We want to be possession creators. So for an offense, like we can't give up the ball. So there is that fine line of on offense being aggressive and protecting the football, and there's that fine line on defense. It's like, hey, I don't care about getting beat, but got to be possession creator. But at the same time, it can't be bombs over Baghdad every situation, right? So that's why risk reward, depending on what's going on and the type of players that you have that can create that from just a physical dominating standpoint is always to your benefit. And then we get the chess players with the coaches that kind of call the situation, but got to execute.
Yeah. I hope that the comment by Kotelnicki is not a bad sign of things to come with the wide receivers. So we're going to talk
about a great sign.
Good sign for the defensive backs, and it's a good learning opportunity for the receivers. So we're going to get to the offense in another episode this week here on State of State. I did want to mention there's been a lot of conversation about, this defense potentially being as good and potentially better than what we saw last year, but some speculating that statistically it might be not as impressive. And I always go to you on this because you're the king of, I don't care about the statistics. I want to see what I see on the field. Like, I'll see it when I see it. Jimmy's and Joe's versus X's and O's, that sort of thing. And there's been also a conversation about the defensive line being the strongest unit that this defense has. I agree with that. And then I think I also disagree with that all at the same time. It's kind of like I'm leaning more towards lockdown you and the defensive backs altogether. There just feels like there's more depth and more certainty, even though, yes, I understand there's some new faces at corner and people that are stepping up altogether, but I don't know. And we could be biased on this show between you and I with lockdown you, but I was like, I don't know if I feel that type of comfort with the D line that I do with the DBs. What do you think?
I mean, I agree. I think there's something that's to be said about like group success when we talk about DB group or D line group. Because like those guys that have been in the room, like they've seen like the films that they watch, they've seen success on the film, right? Like the corrections, it's like, oh, we can make that play. So there's a standard of what they're expecting. We see where that stands. So like the guys that are stepping in, they understand where the standard is. So when we think about like the defensive line group, not that they haven't had pure success, but we've had some holes show up or different things that, you know, from a defensive lineman standpoint that may have to get fixed, right? So from just the standpoint of them seeing success already, I would lean towards the defensive backs. Like you said, like guys that have gone to the NFL, they play with a lot of NFL players. And yeah, it's just kind of stepping into the case versus the defensive line. There are some new additions that have been different areas on the team. And then like whether you're stepping in and it's like, hey, we have some holes or some spotty games from the defensive line play, like whether they have to feel like they have to raise their standards, right? Versus a group that's like, hey, this is what we do. And we're just kind of rolling and going on with the show. So I would lean towards lockdown you, but that's just me.
we can be biased a little bit. Defensive tackle does feel like they've made the right strides in terms of building from a physical standpoint to be a little bit larger to compete against those more stout offensive lines that you're going to see in the Big Ten. So I'm encouraged to see that. The word about Abdul Carter is that he's been, quote, a menace in camp. So there's two ways to look at that. Either he's a natural switching from linebacker to DN, or you could look at that and be like, Penn State's tackles might be in a little trouble. So we'll get to that when we talk about the offense later in this week. And then you have some variety, I think, with this defensive end room altogether, Justin. I think it's really interesting is Abdul is a completely different athlete to deny Dennis Sutton, Amin Vanover as well. I don't know. I think he's kind of somewhere in between of the two of those guys. And then Smith Vilbert, we talked about it recently on the show, 290 pounds coming off the edge. You pick the right moment to utilize that guy, the right matchup. That's going to be very exciting. And there is unfortunately a lack of experience and depth because we talked about Jameel Lyons is no longer on the team. Zariah Fisher is injured. So there is that lack of depth now at defensive end. Carter, we'll believe it when we see it in season. But it's like, man, there's variety here. It just gives you options as a defensive coordinator, correct?
Yeah, 100%. Like we talked about before, you as a defensive coordinator or offensive coordinator, you want players that produce creativity and not problem-solving situations because that's when you can see the genius of these coaches come to life and show on the field so we can enjoy it.
One last point here from defensive coordinator Tom Allen. I was curious to get your thoughts on this. Is this year the green dot, the radio in the helmet, is going to be implemented for both the offense and the defense? And you experienced this in the National Football League. For those who don't know, there's one player on both offense and defense on the field eligible, and they have a little green sticker in the back of the helmet, and that's to indicate that they are the player on the field with a radio in their helmet. They have communication to the sideline. So you'll probably still see the guys doing gymnastics on the sideline and all the hand gestures and stuff like that, maybe holding up signs. So you'll probably still see that, but there will be that communication. Tom Allen was asked about it, and he said, quote, "The green dot is going to be dependent on the offensive style we're facing. Do they huddle? Do they not? We're working on a variety of ways to get our plays into the defense. The green dot will be a constant." Did you ever get to experience that in the National Football League where you didn't
100%.
have the green dot? What was that like?
100%. So James Laurinaitis, linebackers coach for Ohio State, with me. I played nickel. He was the middle linebacker. So a lot of our communications
The St. Louis Rams at the time,
at
correct?
the Rams at the time, yes. And a lot of the communication came through him, and then I had to get it from him and then echo it back to everybody else. So the thing that happens in NFL is like you realize these top offensive coordinators, it's really a personnel game. Like maybe it's just me playing nickel, just always trying to match the personnel, like what's going on here, there. Whether it's the guy for the Broncos now, Sean Payton, like Sean Payton and all these guys, or even the Shanahans, they would throw out different personnel, whether it's like 3 tight ends, 2 running backs, and they would stand on the numbers. And you just kind of wait to see what's going on. And then like there's a time that happens and sort of switching personnel. So the main thing that happens in the NFL is making sure that you're matched up from a personnel standpoint. And then from that, make sure that the play's on point so that we're matching like bodies. And that changes week to week based on someone that's going Cadillac or a fast pace versus hulling up. But regardless, you have to be keen in on like bodies that are coming in. That's why it's so important to have a plethora or dichotomy of different type of athletes out there. So just in case you get into a situation where you can't, a situation where you can't find or defend someone, you can last another down. So it happened a lot in the NFL where that was probably a game within the game where you're like sprint to the hash, sprinting back, like, oh, who's in, who's out, so.
And that's going to be a learning curve for these athletes and the coaches as well. I mean, there may be some guys who have had experience with it in the past, but in terms of the athletes on the field, this will be a first. So
you have to start thinking like a coach. Like, all right, it's second down. Like, okay, what am I thinking here? Okay, what do they like to do on second down? They like to go levels. Okay, they typically go 21 personnel. Like, so you have to be thinking and anticipating what the coach is going to say, because if they're reading and getting all this information, they're just like, hey, we got this. By that time, someone like Drew Brees, when I was playing, like Aaron, them dudes they're on the huddle and they're ready to go. And like
he's a mile ahead of you. Yeah.
A mile ahead of you. So like when it's happening, that's why we talk about players and the processing skills. Like even in college, I think that's going to come more into the phase. We get all these offensive coordinators like Chip and these different guys that are coming into the Big Ten. They're going to try to make sure that they get edges in numbers. That's what this whole game is about. Is numbers and angles, right? So you're just trying to get that matchup to your benefit a lot of times from just personnel alignment and assignment. If we can get that from the beginning, get going, it's a W.
We're all learning this here. It's a brave new world in 2024 for college football in a lot of ways. Hop in the comments section. Tell us how you guys are feeling about the defense at this point in training camp. A lot of positivity. It's been a lot more physical as well from what we understand. Penn State is trying to change, I think, a little bit of the culture in terms of making this more of a physical team. Some bumps and bruises along the way, but James Franklin and company monitoring that very, very closely. So hop in the comments section. Let us know what you guys think on YouTube, on social media at State of State Pod. Like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. And if you're not already, become a member of our YouTube channel for just 99 cents a month to see ad-free shows just in time for the season. Later on this week, we'll be looking at the offense and what's going on at this point in training camp. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, let us know what you think of the show on social media and check out all of our content on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Search for the handle at State of State Pod. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.